Are you a military service member or veteran struggling with insomnia? A new study is investigating a non-drug therapy program that you can receive from your computer or a smartphone. If you find it difficult to fall or stay asleep or feel tired throughout the day, internet-guided cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia may be a treatment worth exploring. If you or a loved one is a current or former military service member, has had a head injury, and are between the ages of 18 and 64, you might qualify for this study. Call or text 301-456-5474 or head on over to militaryveterandad.com/sleep.
Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home.
Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Cloy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to Military Veteran Dad, episode 154. I am your host, Ben Cloy, and as always, we got another jam-packed episode for you this week. We've got a theme coming up here with the next few episodes about personal freedom, finance, and really setting up your life to have a width so you can see yourself in a different light. And today's episode is no different from all the other episodes because today we dive into some core truths of the military, our transition in, our transition out. And like I said, Tyson, who is our guest today, just brings a jam-packed episode with a great story of his life. Let me tell you a little bit about Tyson and who he is. At the age of 13, Tyson became an entrepreneur for the very first time. He opened a snowball stand in his small hometown. This was the first taste of financial independence, and he was hooked. By 20, Tyson was a helicopter pilot in the Army. Although making more than he ever had, he was also the most in debt. Thanks to Desert Storm and the inability to spend money on anything, he paid down that debt, another financial lesson learned. After leaving the military and with the GI Bill funds in hand, Tyson earned a bachelor's degree in English and a master's degree in philosophy. Faced with few job prospects, however, Tyson turned to IT. He spent 25 years in the software development world, worked for several large corporations, and then he founded the organization that brought him to us today, OnTrajectory.com, a personal finance tool for both consumers and professionals. Tyson's new life goal is to bring easy and accurate financial modeling to everyone. I've had a chance to check out OnTrajectory, and it's a great tool because you immediately log into this thing, and it gives you this cliff, essentially showing you how long everything you've got is going to last and showing you where it is going to fall apart. And as the title suggests, are you on trajectory to hit your goals? So without further ado, let's get started with my episode with Tyson Koska. And as always, hang on to the other side of this interview for my big takeaway. Welcome to the podcast, Tyson. We are going all the way out to Baltimore, Maryland, and we're going to be talking to a U.S. Army helicopter pilot about his transition out, going through the process that we talk about a lot in this podcast, but he has kind of a unique place where he's ended up. And so, Tyson, I'm really excited to hear your story today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Ben.
So let's go all the way back because your story started when you were 20 and you became a helicopter pilot. Tell me back then, what were you looking for? What were you looking for in your life that you thought, you know what, the U.S. Army has exactly what I want?
Yeah, that was a really weird time in my life. I grew up lower middle class, like a lot of people, and but I grew up lower middle class in a neighborhood or a part of the state where there was a lot of upper middle class around. So when I graduated high school, we had, I don't know what the exact percentages are, but all my friends were going away to college. Their parents were supporting them. They were living in the dorms. They were, doing exactly what you kind of picture upper middle class kids, high school kids, to be doing. I wasn't fortunate enough to be in that situation. Growing up, my dad was a Baltimore County police officer. My mom was a waitress. She worked a lot of night shifts. He worked a lot of night shifts. I babysat my little brother growing up. It was just not the same as a lot of my friends and in my peer group. So they all had these plans to go off, and I applied. I remember I applied for a 4-year ROTC scholarship at Virginia Tech. And I was sure I was going to get it. And I didn't get it. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do? And my dad had been in the military. My grandfather had been in the military. And I thought, well, maybe I'll, do the military and GI Bill. And, that'll give me, that way I won't have to work full time while I'm in college. So I went to the recruiter, and the recruiter said, well, let's get you in, take the ASVAB test, et cetera, et cetera. Scores came back, and he said, we have a special program where you can go from high school to flight school. And, would you be interested in that?
I wonder how much the Army paid for that tagline.
I don't know. This was a long
probably.
time ago. Yeah. High school to flight school. And I don't even know if the program still exists, to be honest. But this is back in, well, I guess this is like my senior year of high school, because I was looking, because I had no backup plan. And so I ended up taking a year applying to this program and actually getting disqualified at some point and fighting back and getting accepted and crazy. So the interview, so there was a board, there was a colonel, there was a captain, there was a lieutenant on this board, and you walk in and they try to knock you off balance as soon as you walk in. You're trying to see how you handle pressure. And, I'm a 18-year-old kid, and there's these 3 bean bags on the desk, and they said, hey, really, thanks for coming in. Glad you're interested in the program. See those bean bags? Juggle them. And I was like, wow, that's a tall order. Now, what they didn't know is that I had taught myself how to juggle when I was 15 years old. So I picked up the bean bags. I started juggling them. They each looked at each other and said, okay, put them down. And I realized that the dynamic in the room shifted. I was supposed to be off balance. No, they were off balance. In any case, it's not that important. But the point is that it was not easy to get into this program. So that was why I joined the program, because it was an incredible opportunity. Go from high school, basic training, warrant officer candidate school, OH-58 pilot, in 1 year.
Oh, wow. 1 year?
Yeah.
That's a high sell and a high pressure environment. I'm sure the helicopters weren't sophisticated as they are now, but still, it's not something that I feel like right now it's like 3 or 4 years to fly something now. Well,
so things could have changed. Obviously, it's been a while since I was out. But if you were flying either the OH-58 Kiowa or you were flying a Huey, you could go directly from, again, it's basic, then right into warrant officer candidate school, then right into flight school. It is a little bit longer than a year, but it's about a year. And as long as you're flying either 58 or the Huey, you can go direct. Now, if you're doing Black Hawk, Apache, even Cobra, then you had subsequent school. And I think it took those guys about 2 years. I was a 58 pilot.
So as a man that had a unique life growing up, saw the world differently than most, what was the big takeaway out of that program that you felt like was really adding to who you are? Did you figure something out about yourself? I'm sure you figured out something about it, but I'm here just to kind of see and hear about that journey of what did that help you discover within probably that you didn't know you even had yourself?
Yeah, for me, it was the fact that everything is doable. There's really nothing that you can't do. If you focus on it, you have the right mindset, you can do anything. And the Army taught me that. I mean, there were times, in flight school where it was just, they were beating up on you. They're trying to get you to have a wrong attitude. But if you just focus and keep the right attitude, you can literally do anything. You can go from high school to flight school and be a 20-year-old helicopter pilot in Korea like I was.
I love the attitude for that you can do anything, because somewhere along the line, we don't get that often in just basic military service. I don't know if it's kind of tempered by you only can do what you're told. And so we kind of tamper down where we could go. I know if Marine, in the Marine Corps, there's kind of two people. There's people that are just carving their own way, and they don't really, they respect orders, but they're also at the same time, they're carving the fine line right next to them. Then there's people like me that was almost I was always the guy that followed the rules. I wasn't a guy that kind of like stand out, and I wasn't really looking to push that needle through like a leadership bubble or figuring out how I could grow or how fast I could grow or just like even going all in on professional development. That was like fear was something that still governed a lot of my life back then. Did you find that similar, any of that in your life?
Um, I want to ask you a quick question before I answer that.
Yeah.
Didn't you learn though that you were capable of doing things you never imagined doing?
I did things that I was never capable of imagining, but the word that I would season it with is the belief.
Ah, that's interesting.
Because you don't really have a choice. In boot camp, you're just doing these things. You do them because you're told.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed really looking back, especially because I still, for even in the Marine Corps and after the Marine Corps, I still had some of the same crappy thoughts. I didn't recognize the success of doing those things. I didn't realize like the gratitude or the accomplishment or feeling proud of myself. That was something that I struggled with in the corporate world of validating myself from the outside world and not having it met, and then always trying to reach for more or like be validated by someone. So having it like never be enough, like that kind of just corrupted that. I did a lot of great things, but none of it felt extraordinary or even remarkable, just because I felt like an ordinary man and I never was able to believe myself to be different than that.
And then on reflection, things have changed.
Oh, definitely. I still like, even now for me, when the Eagle Global Anchor was put in my hand, I use that as like this infinite power source. So like I carry, the only good use for a challenge coin that I found is to carry it in my pocket, and especially the ones that have the Eagle Global Anchor on it. I hold that when I get like, when I'm getting shaky and weary and overwhelmed, I grip that. It creates a physical feeling in my hand, creates a tension in my hand. And I remember back when that was placed in my hand for the first time and how infinite my ability essentially was and is in that moment. And also the heritage of all the Marines that came before me. These were things I learned, but I didn't really believe that I had something in me, because again, there was a disconnect of doing big things and believing it, that, and I've never really put all this together before, but believing it never was something I had. So connecting myself to all of the Marines before me and all of Marines since then, like that's something I walk around with, and that wasn't something I acknowledged back then. But now, anytime it's like for me driving a stake in the ground. Like if I'm in a river and I feel like I'm getting swept away, it's like sticking that rod in the ground so that the water flows around me. But again, it comes from that Eagle Global Anchor moment when I became something more than I ever thought, and now I believe it. And now it's weird how I say it, but I was a good Marine, but I didn't know how to be a Marine until probably 10 years after the Marine Corps. Because I was good at doing the different things to be a Marine.
Right. The mechanical
parts, but actually like flipping it into like believing to be a man of integrity, believing you're a man of commitment, believing you're a man of courage. That's a whole nother level to my journey of being a Marine.
I mean, thank goodness you did. I mean, and I guess I'm sure there are people that don't, they actually have the power. You used the word infinite when you were holding the coin, that infinite power. So I think, I mean, obviously it's great that you did. It's bad if people don't, but for me, that moment did happen at the same time as going through all the shit. I remember even in just basic training, I remember, now I was never a high school athlete. I was always in bands, playing music and chasing girls and stuff like that. And I never considered myself very athletic. And, when you start doing PT every day and you're just like pounding it out, my body changed and things were working a little bit better. And me and a couple of guys were, just, I don't know what we were doing. We were screwing around during a break time, and our drill sergeant, who we had really bonded with, through this experience, he said, "You see that drill sergeant over there? Go over there and tell him you can't smoke a rock." And we're like, "You can't smoke a rock? What does that even mean?" And I didn't realize it at the time. I was brand new into the military, and so me and these two other guys ran down. They were like, "Drill sergeant, you can't smoke a rock." And he's like, "Oh, I can't. Get down. Start doing push-ups." Right. So we're doing push-ups for like, you're a Marine,
forever.
Right. Forever. And we did push-ups so long and wouldn't give up. He's like, "You tell me when to stop." That he got bored and left. and we yelled at him, "You can't smoke." And then we realized what it meant. You can't smoke a rock. If it's a rock.
Yeah, we're the rocks, and you can't smoke us on. Yeah,
and it was doing those kind of small things that never realized I could do, and like, oh man, I can do this stuff. Yeah, this is cool.
The one thought that I would maybe add to our conversation or our tangent is I also had the desire to be invisible. Probably because of I didn't necessarily feel like I belonged there. Like I was being someone that I like was waiting to be found out. And so any of the times that I would grow through different things or accomplish different things, and there was different moments looking back. Like there was one particular where we go up north for field week. And there was a moment where we were outside eating our MREs, essentially practicing eating MREs. Like you need practice eating those damn things. But we were outside eating one at night. And all of a sudden, like we were asked to do something and I just broke and I just started crying. And eventually I got us all in trouble and we had to do something stupid. But essentially out of that, like that failure to just hold it all in, all the Marines around me got stronger and realized that there was a man falling behind. And so like, again, I didn't realize at the moment, but now looking back, that was like this early lesson, like vulnerability isn't something that pushes people away. It brings people closer. And now that's something I talk about here regularly. And we just did together talking about these things that most people don't talk about openly on the internet, but it's that vulnerability that brings people closer. And so like, there's another lesson, like I didn't even realize like, someone on the outside would have been like, oh man, I can't believe you. That's so powerful what you did. I would have thought it was an ordinary thing and I would have been ashamed probably. I did. I'm sure I felt ashamed in that moment because you don't fucking cry in boot camp. And here I am crying in boot camp. And it's that type of shitty narrative that just gets you stuck.
It is so cool that you're talking about this stuff, and putting yourself out there, talking about it, because for every person that's talking about it, there's 1,000 people that are completely afraid to talk about it. Makes them feel even more vulnerable or more invisible. I think you used the word invisible. And you're like, hey, look at me. I'm not invisible anymore. And these are real human things that real humans go through.
Yeah.
And the fact that your buddies picked up the slack, filled in the gap. We're not even going to call it a gap. It's read the situation and did what they needed to do to get everyone through. That is amazing. And you sounds like, maybe not in the moment, but eventually you took the right lesson away from it.
Yeah. And so I got out in 2007 and in 2014, kind of a similar swallowing it down moment of I was going to school. I was doing exactly what I was supposed to. And I dropped out of school because I failed 2 classes and I was like, this isn't working. I need to just quit and give up. I didn't realize in that moment, but I was essentially quitting. I didn't call myself a quitter back then, but that quitting moment then had me like for the next 6 months figuring out, oh crap, that was supposed to fix everything. Now what? And so that like hitting rock bottom there allowed me to kind of reboot and relearn all these lessons. And now 20 or 8 years later, it's all kind of come back together. And now it's part of my message. I've made my mess my message, as they say in professional speaking. Awesome. And now sharing it with everybody. And I'm a walking, talking oxymoron. I always describe that like I'm a Marine. I talk about my emotions regularly. I give good hugs, and I have no problem talking about anything regularly or crying in public. Like these are all things like I've had a few friends early on like, that's not the picture of a Marine. That Marines don't cry. And I'm like, I hate to tell you that, but this Marine cries, and I hate to break your stereotype that the commercials paint of us, but there are more of us like us. We just don't come out of the woodwork very often.
Break those stereotypes. Do it.
Yeah. I want to go to an interesting question that I thought about in our questioning there. As you went through your military service, what were some of the lessons that allowed you to see that life was bigger? I think we kind of hit on it a little bit that you could do anything, but that feeling is often just a feeling. But like, what really gave you the visibility to see how wide life could be, and now creating and helping other people see the width in their life and making sure they're on target to hit their goals?
I think a lot of that kind of idea, the width of the world, or the width of one's life, and the freedom to be what they can be. So I grew up in Maryland. I went to basic training in South Carolina, Fort Jackson. I went to flight school down in Lower Alabama, which was kind of a different world for me at that point, Fort Rucker. And then I immediately went to Korea. And then from Korea, I went to Germany. And then Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and I ended up in Saudi, and I ended up in Iraq, and then I went back to Germany, and then I got out. And it was like, and I know guys that would go to a post, especially in Korea, would go to the post and never leave the post. They would just be there all the time. They never
Are you on Camp
realized.
Humphreys?
No, but I have been to Camp Humphreys. I was north of there in Dongducheon, so Camp Casey. But Dongducheon's the airfield next to.
Camp Casey is the one in the DMZ, right?
Close, not quite up
but
there.
It's like the one that is part of the joint operations with the UN.
Yeah, they have responsibility for flying the no-fly line, which I did, but just for fun, not as a mission. I was in a cavalry unit. So taking the opportunity that the military gave me to see so much of the world and not just sit in the barracks and only go to the PX and only do that stuff, actually taking advantage of that opportunity and meeting people and talking to people on the economy. When I was in Germany, I lived on the economy. I didn't even live on base. Yeah, I think that's what opened up my eyes to this gigantically awesome world that's out there.
I think that's what we probably have similar in our context. So I grew up on a farm here in southern Wisconsin. I lived under a rock. There, I had my first Chinese when I was in Camp Lejeune, to give you some idea of how much nuts. I didn't get to explore. I went to Florida once, a couple times. I went to Colorado on a vacation with our family. I went to Vegas a few times to visit some grandparents, and that was really about my worldly experience. And then I joined the Marine Corps, and so then I get shipped to Camp Pendleton, and then I get shipped to Camp Lejeune for my training. And then they sent me to Okinawa for 3 years. And so there I saw Korea 4 times. I went up to Camp Casey. I saw the Blue Houses and stood North Korea. I went to Philippines, saw Australia. I did a 2-week vacation down there by myself and just saw the world in a way like, wow, this is so big.
Yeah.
And then also later in life, I got a job with a company headquartered in Prague. And there's what I went to, I think 9 times there in 8 years. And so that also gave me a whole new perspective on culture, life.
Yep.
What we accept as happiness, which is something which is pretty sad for the American dream. Like I almost phrase it as like the average American dream is usually dressed up as the American hell, but we're too afraid to kind of admit it. But it comes from that not having width and just not challenging what in definition of happiness looks like. And
I think that's
we
really
also
wise.
see like a struggle to dream. Like that's what you probably also felt when you go see the world, is you get width to dream bigger. And most people don't have that.
Very good. And I'm with you right there.
When you started seeing the world, I'm interested to see what some of those early dreams might have been. Like, I'm sure this wasn't the first idea that you had of how you could impact or change the world.
Well, I think for one is I always wanted to, and I can't remember the phrase you just used, but it was implied in what you said. I never wanted to assume that the way we did things was the right way and the way other people do things is the wrong way, or that there's some inherent perfection or goodness, just because I happen to come from America. And so having the military experience, having the travel experience, one thing that I always want to do whenever I speak to someone is, if I have the insight, is to open their borders a little bit, or help them grow in some way, or figure something out that maybe they hadn't figured out before. And that's what really drives me is, is there just something maybe I could just offer up, some little thing I heard someplace that might help this person in their current situation, and to never close my mind off to think, oh, that's right, or that's wrong, or especially that's wrong. I mean, it's very easy to, especially in the bipartisan sort of,
the black and white world that we're just,
right, in the partisan world that we're in.
Yep.
It's so easy to get into an echo chamber, and whatever that little niche that you want, you can literally spend all day there, get all the media you want, have people and associates that are in there. And I just constantly want to push people outside of that little thing. Of course, it irritates a lot of people sometimes when I disagree with everything they say, but that was sort of one of the takeaways of that experience.
I didn't necessarily learn that type of wisdom until even just till 2022 hit or 2020 hit, when everything was kind of going crazy and Black Lives Matter was just getting legs under it. And for me, I learned the lesson that year that it's more powerful to understand how someone learned to see the world a certain way than for me to try to influence it. Because like what I've learned, and you learned this as well, is that perspective is the most valuable asset that most of us never go after. And I mean, think of how many people never read a book after college because they think education is done. And yet, how many books are out there that perspective from Benjamin Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, like these people that when you read them, you're like, man, wisdom needs to be applied at a viral level today, but it's 300 years old. That perspective is most what people aren't seeking in life these days.
Yeah, I really like what you said about, how you learn, or how you learned your situation versus what your situation is. Something we haven't discussed is after I got out of the military, something else the military taught me was that, well, it goes back to the original. I can do whatever I want to do. And I decided, I had always been in high school very mathematical. I learned computer programming as a young child. I always had a technical science skill set or inclination, I should say. And when I got out of the military and started using my GI Bill, I became an English and philosophy major. So I actually have a master's in philosophy. So I decided at that point, I'm not just going to chase. I'm not going to get a degree for the money. I'm not going to do what I think I should do because I should be doing it. I want to learn, as you said, learn how to learn. I want to get the tools that will help me even further, even more than the confidence I already felt, but give me the academic tools to just go wherever I want to go and do whatever I want to do.
Learn how to think, not what to think.
Yeah, that's what you said. That's the smart thing you said.
It wasn't me. I heard it on an Instagram reel the other day, and I was like,
"See, Instagram full of wisdom."
And because he was essentially talking about our education system, how it teaches people what to think and not how to think, and all the media sources aren't telling you how to think; they're telling you what to think, which then just pollutes how you think and prevents you from seeing things any differently, and just eventually getting your confirmation bias. And I loved how you also pursued something for perspective. And in the end, you still ended up having a system that produces monetary value that you didn't necessarily pursue directly. And I would argue that a lot of people do it the other way. They go into college, getting that paper to get something monetary on the other end, and it doesn't work. They ended up either they find their way back to the military because they had a degree in bird migration and someone told them it wasn't going to work, or they have just something that was sold to them in a wrong way that doesn't apply in the real world. But perspective is one of those things that is never like, you just can't unlearn it to the point where it's never going to change how you influence and connect. And the reason why I have this podcast is because those little perspectives are often what I love doing the most. And outside of this podcast, I also have the Business of Fatherhood. And that one's a short daily podcast where it's just perspective after perspective. It's only me on the microphone over and over, just sharing how I saw the world in different ways and how someone could benefit from that.
I love you said you can't change your perspective, right? That's kind of the seed, that's the core, and then you carry that forward.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
And as we think about where you're going next with your OnTrajectory program and what you're able to do with your software, there's something that we can also go to that I'm wondering how you had to learn through this. And I think if I were to take a guess, you had the visibility to get through it. But in order to be successful, you have to help other people see it as well. That most people don't live for a week from today, a year from today, a decade from today. Most people are living for the next hour. And if they can get through the next hour, it's a win. How have you learned to work through that bias that people just outsource the future to whatever happens?
Yeah. So I agree with you that people's attention span is really short and they're not thinking real far ahead. And I think it's for a lot of reasons. One, we live in a confusing and disturbing world where Russia could be invading or has already sent some troops over the eastern border of Ukraine this morning. It's a scary world. It's also a world full of conflicting advice. even the realm I play in personal finance, you can get lots of different. You should get a Roth IRA. No, you should get a traditional IRA. No, you should. I mean, whatever. I mean, you got these.
You should only invest in index funds.
Right, which I think is true.
I would agree with you on that
one. But so much conflicting advice, so much, just the sheer volume of information is crazy. And then there's the trust. Do I see a financial planner? Can I trust this guy? Is this guy really got my best intentions in mind? You hear about people, fraud, scams, it is just such a myriad that I think compresses you into, well, I can't answer those questions out into this vague future, but I can answer what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, right? So, maybe that's part of where there's this compression of time perspective comes from, is because it's just so confusing, so weird, and potentially dangerous. And honestly, I felt all of that. So when I finished my philosophy degree, I couldn't find a job. Who knew? And I told you I had learned how to program when I was younger, when I was like 13 years old. And I just applied for some technical work in the computer industry, in the IT industry. And I spent 25 years in the IT industry. It wasn't until, I started OnTrajectory about 7 or 8 years ago. And it was because I had the chops as a programmer and someone in IT. I didn't really trust financial advisors, to be honest, too much. I learned later that there's certain kinds that are much more trustworthy than others. But I just wanted to put the pieces together for myself. I wanted to create software that let me say, okay, if I put this money in my 401k and I put this money in the college savings plan for my child, and if we decide to buy a house instead of rent a house, what does that do to my overall financial life? And once I came up with a methodology for doing that, I thought, well, I can't be the only person that sees this. This is a really long answer to your question. So what I want to say, what the ultimate point that I want to make is, if you do take the time to climb outside of that compressed time frame that we talked about, and you do kind of get your financial life out onto paper or in the computer or whatever, it gives you some freedom. I think it gives back some freedom to enjoy the here and now, because I'm not repressing, hey, how am I going to pay for X in X years? And instead of just ignoring it or repressing it, because if you ignore it or you repress it, it's still going to bug you, whether it's top of mind or not. It's like that
spyware on your Windows computer. It still takes RAM, even though it's running in the background.
Exactly. So if you do have a plan and you do get it out, and even if the plan says, oh, well, you're not going to be able to afford private college for your kids, but you can afford an in-state school, and you're like, well, that's a pretty good deal. That's giving me peace of mind. Now all of a sudden, that stress, I can let it go, and it's not there anymore. And as long as I check in from time to time and I see what I'm doing, and so that's what I want to do. I wanted to so that's what the software did for me, and that's what I would, that's my thing now. I quit my corporate IT job a couple of years ago, and this is what I want to do.
One thing that I've learned, especially when I'm just coaching men, is what we just talked about, that trap of thinking, the trap of the future, also the trap of the repeated patterns in the past. Like, there's a lot of like just basic trauma of, I've always been this. I mean, there's a world where you didn't break out of your pattern and you just repeated how your life has unfolded up to you're 18 years old, and you did the opposite. You broke that pattern, and now you're creating an entirely different branch on your family tree. A lot of what I've learned when I walk through men through designing their legacy is a trick that I have to do, and I always describe it like a magic trick, because sometimes it like happens in half of a second, is they can't visualize what they want to do in the future. Like, they just can't even visualize their life outside the norm. And I have to give them $1 million. The moment you give them $1 million, the floodgates open. Like, oh, I would do this. I've had so many amazing, like, one guy was wanting to do a farm for kids that didn't have fathers, and like show them how to work the land, show them like life skills, give them that leadership that they didn't have from a dad. And he works at a mail clerk place. And I was like, that's the exact opposite of what you're doing now. But I had to give him $1 million for him to access that. That the breaking outside that pattern that you actually have to redefine the rules of how you consider your life. Like getting $1 million isn't a normal thing that people are going to get, but the moment they get it, their capacity to see the world differently instantaneously changes.
Yeah, I think there might be something similar. So in the way that, what I'm trying to do urges people to get all their assumptions about the future out. Once you get those assumptions, now I guarantee you, all your assumptions, none of your, no one's accurately predicting their life 40 years down the line. But just getting those assumptions out, it's like, I guess in a way, it's like you're cashing out, like you said, once I have the $1 million, I have the freedom to be what I want to be. Once you get all your assumptions out, you get the freedom to start living them and maybe change them and realize that things are going to change.
And what we're really talking about here, as I hinted there, we're talking about legacy and tying it back to the military. One thing that, and I think this is why this interview is really impactful for military dads, is because we focus on the legacy of our service while we're serving. And even while we're, especially if we lost someone or we had some type of traumatic event happen while we're serving, we continued to get haunted by finding meaning in those assumptions of like, what did it all matter? Like, why did I go there? And like, why did that person have to die? Why am I here? Which have no good answers. And we overlook the idea that legacy is your family, not your service. And I realized that in like the first year and a half of like, this is like the big epiphany of what military members struggle with is we don't focus on the right legacy. And meanwhile, our life is generally going to blow up because we're going to get divorced because we can't show up and we're worried about all these demons inside our head, all these assumptions that aren't going to come true. And then you lose the one thing that matters most until then one day you realize, oh man, it was right there all in front of me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to tie that back to what we said earlier. So I agree. Your legacy is not a brick in a building or I was a proud veteran. It is the people that you influence, your family. I've got 2 little girls, what their lives are going to be like, right? They're going to have kids. And I don't necessarily need them to be pro-military, but I do need them to be pro-self-sufficient, pro-I can do, pro-correct mindset, pro-I can get dirty and still overcome, which is what I got from the military. And I'm sure coming from a military family, it was pushed into me. And so, definitely the legacy is not the past or serving, but there are little nuggets in there that I think get passed along inside the family unit, which is really important.
And I think you just hit on a big point that I want to make sure every dad listens to and hits on and understands is, especially as a veteran, we've lived the world that less than 10% of the population has. We have a perspective, as we talked about. We have a depth to the world. We see the world through an eye of pain that most people never, ever comprehend of what it's actually like. If we can convert those lessons and gift them to our kids, like you just mentioned, that ability is to create a better, more capable, stronger adult. And here's the crazy part, like what I struggled with, that belief word. If you can gift your kids and your daughters that belief to impact and understand how they can do it, the funny thing happens is they generally do. Like they have these skill sets to go out there and do it. And they know they don't get their value from Instagram. Like that's kind of like my basic value for my daughter, or how I measure it when they're 18 is, do they get their value from the outside world? Do they worry about the likes? Are they good at dismissing someone's opinion? Like, especially like my oldest daughter is 4th grade. So we're kind of in the early days of just everything, I would say. And there's so many times that kids will say things and will do things that mean kids do. Or even it happens with their brother, like they'll call each other stupid. And I'll tell them, I was like, well, are you? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, I'm just reinforcing all the time. Your opinion of yourself is the one that matters most. And you get to decide what you believe and what you choose. Man, is that's like that early feeling of they're trying to fit in, but then trying to balance that with you already have everything inside you. And I'm sure your program even also cultivates that a belief of wherever your trajectory is going, you already have all the fruits and letters and everything you need inside you to do what you need to make that impact. It's just that inward ability to believe, perspective to even see that you have it, and then the courage to actually go out there and fucking do it.
Yeah. I love what you said about being able to dismiss certain opinions. That was something I really struggled with when I was younger, not so much anymore, but, popular kid at school says something about my sneakers or whatever. I stressed about it hard. And I think what you said is really cool about, in fourth grade, being able to ignore the jibes of other, let's face it, there's some people that are assholes and we don't have to honor their opinions because we don't need to.
Yeah. But then also, like, this real struggle is helping them understand, especially when it's like a person that they are friends with. Like, that's even like, why do people hurt people that care about each other? Like, there's so many nuances. And
if you could answer that question, I think that would be really good.
well, and generally, I always describe it to my daughter, hurt people. And just because someone's hurting you doesn't mean it's a reflection of who they are. It's because they're hurting inside and it feels like a natural reflex to do. And if you believe the person's good on the inside, then they are good. It's just right now they need a friend and they need you to ignore the words that they're saying because they need someone to care about them often in those moments.
Yep, that's good.
There is another idea that kind of solidifies through all of this, and it's the hardest part as a veteran. I don't think it was probably so hard if I were to take a guess for your story, but finding value in our story, I think, because that's like that's why one of the very first things I started talking about in this podcast is your story is your best asset to help teach your kids. And we often think we're incapable or we don't know how or we don't read the manual, and kids don't have manuals, so we just wing it. And the reality is we already have everything, just like we were just got done talking about. We already have everything we need to be a good dad. But finding value in that story is often the biggest struggle. And some of the stories I'm telling my daughter are my stories of struggling in different moments. And here's the crazy part, that when you do these types of things, your kids get a chance to know you as well. And most kids have a disconnect from knowing who their dad is. And like I say, the worst case scenario often is when your kids are at your funeral, they're talking to one of your friends and they hear a story and they're like, damn it, why didn't my dad tell me that? I would have loved to have asked him a question about it. To me, I've lost at that point. Like if my kids don't know the best parts of my life and my stories, they're missing out on how to draw wisdom from it. And they're not going to understand your legacy, and it'll dry up on the vine and people won't remember you a couple decades after you left.
Yeah, you need to share. You got to share that stuff, and you have to realize too that not everybody has the same valuableness at all times. I learned some things earlier, I learned some things later, and just share what you got. Just share what you got. Just open it up, and just like you're doing on this show, and someone's going to get a lesson from that. Hopefully your kids are going to be the primary recipients of those lessons.
And some things don't stick. That's the other thing with kids is like, I talked to my daughter about meditation probably for like 3 years. And it wasn't until a month ago that she finally kicked the habit. And now she's been doing it for almost, I feel like 45 days. I feel like her streak is on.
That is
so
awesome.
Sometimes you just got to talk to your blue in the face. It's not like a PFC that they're just going to do, hopefully, what you tell them immediately and then start figuring it out. It's something that you have to keep cultivating every single day and show up and almost not just get discouraged right away. That's another hard part of converting all this stuff.
So in listening to your show, I know that you often ask a dad, what was the thing about having kids that you got completely wrong? At least I heard it on a couple of them. And so I thought about it. I was like, well, if he asked me this question, what am I going to say? And what you just said completely ties into what my answer would have been if you were going to ask me that question.
What's your answer? What is the one thing about being a dad that you had to throw out when you first started applying the book?
So I wanted to be like a really cool parent. I wanted to be like easygoing, give the kid enough rope to hang themselves kind of thing. Like just let them push the boundaries. But then when their boundary hit, that was it. That was okay. Now we're done. I gave you lots and lots of room. This is the boundary. Now you need to respect that boundary. And I don't know why I thought this. And in fact, I didn't realize how stupid this perspective was until I started thinking about this question for your podcast. My thinking was they were going to respect the boundary because I was so easygoing. How stupid is that? Of course they're not, because I never set any other boundaries. Why are they going to think that this is any particular different? They're just going to push ahead. And I had to really unlearn. Well, no, what I had to do is I had to learn that I could still be a cool parent. I could still give the kids plenty of space and freedom to make some of their own mistakes. I think it's really, really important for people to make their own mistakes. If I tell you something's a mistake and you don't make this mistake yourself, doesn't matter how many times I say it. But as far as boundaries go, what I realized was, okay, let them make mistakes, but you're going to have to reinforce that boundary again and again and again and again until it really becomes part of, who you are in your message in your relationship and who they are. I didn't realize how many times I was going to have to repeat the same thing again and again. By the way, I'm glad your daughter caught on to meditation. I'm a big proponent of meditating as well. And for me, it's not just sitting in a quiet room and doing it. It's in the grocery store aisle. It's in the airport when things are getting frustrated. It's there's a lot of times when I use meditation techniques that are kind of not normal. But anyway, I think it's great.
And I love what you said about setting boundaries, because I would say this new philosophy is slowly evolving. But I've had this idea that as I hear more and more crap that happens in the kids' schools of just like what other kids are doing, I've been having this feeling that like the outside world is already teaching kids that it's cruel. Why do I have to also join that bandwagon?
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you.
Yep. Because if the outside world is going to make them catch up on that feeling, no matter what I do, why would I want to be a person that also gets into that? And so I've been kind of like, a couple of thoughts that go in my head is shaping a feeling of love, like that's one common feeling I want them to feel when they're at home. They're loved, safe, seen, heard, and understood. And I focus less sometimes on the boundaries. I draw the boundaries, but there's also times where I also recognize, is this just the motion of like saying, keeping it all together at school type thing, where when they come home from school, sometimes like the first thing is like, the emotions are flying off the handle. That's not where I would draw a boundary right there. Yeah. They just need space to let that emotion go, and they just need to be loved despite that feeling they're having. And so I've been trying to mirror that feeling of like, I want them to feel loved no matter how they show up in my house, because the outside world is going to confuse them enough. And if I can teach them that feeling, to me, that's like the one boundary that they should have in your house is, in this house, no matter how I can show up consistently, I see a calm, cool, collective dad that shows me who I am, helps me understand and navigate through it. And no matter what I'm feeling, he'll be there to ground me in that storm that he's going through, especially for daughters. Like sometimes those emotional storms are just ravaging crazy. And sometimes you can like, I remember early in my days, I would just get so hung up on like punishing and like riding the bandwagon of timeouts, and then realizing like once you don't draw those boundaries, and sometimes realizing it's like a 3-minute emotion. If you just let it rise up and come back down, they would have gone right back to normal, and you burn the house down for something that was a temporary feeling. I think that's hard to measure and figure out. It's a hard
lesson. It's a hard lesson, but I had to learn it too. Yeah.
And especially with daughters, like when I first lost my job in 2020, right before Corona, I was home with her for the next year because she was in preschool. And so she'd be home with me in the morning and I would take her to preschool in the afternoon. There was times where she would be emotionally upset about something in the morning and it would be just her. So I had this kind of like unique time with her that I now will cherish for the rest of my life. She would be crying or something and I would just sit next to her and hold her. I wouldn't say a single word. And I think that's like what we're talking about here. Like that's the feeling they need in your home, more than you need you to be right.
Yeah. And you know what? As far as needing to be right, I mean, you're a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old man. What do you need to be right with a 4-year-old about? You can be wrong. They're not gonna know.
I'll season that with, most likely, whatever age you are, you probably haven't figured out how life works. What freaking right do we have to assume they have?
The other thing I just want to mention, because you reminded me when you were talking, I think it was Brian Tracy or some motivational speaker. He said that no matter how angry he was at his kids, and no matter what horrible thing they screwed up or what they did wrong, no matter how bad it was, when he went in and he talked to them, he said, first off, I love you. Second, we got to talk about this thing that you did.
Yeah, grounding in that love, because like I said, like the outside world is already going to teach them, and it's almost pretty much a certainty. The outside world is going to teach them there's a lot of good in the world, but early on in those world, the kids are going to learn that there's a lot more cruel in the world. So like to me, it's more psychologically safe to have them feel grounded at home, and then as they grow up and find the good in the world, because it does exist, it's just hard in a combined classroom that continues to make fighting for your popularity every day vent. That to me, like and we're both still in the early days of the incubator lab here, but more and more I see this play out, the more and more I feel like that with my daughter 16 or 17, like there's a thought that I often play too, is that I want her to be at a party, know that it's feel like not safe, and know 100% that she can call me and that we're going to make it better. But if you weren't there for the little things, or you scared her in the little things, she's going to remember that when it's the big things.
Yeah.
Or when you get in an accident, the same idea.
Yep. Yep. And what you said about there is a lot of, goodness in the world. It occurred to me that unless you really instill someone that there is goodness, and you give them the tools to see the goodness, and you teach them how to figure out what's actually good and what only maybe looks good and is not really good, unless you've given your kids those tools, they're not going to be able to experience that same kind of joy and happiness in their life.
I'll tie it back to your software. Your software, I would take a big bet, helps identify a path towards goodness. And if you don't invite that into your life, you're not showing your kids a path of how to find it in theirs.
I love
that's
that.
why
you need a job, come on over to OnTrajectory. This is great stuff.
I think of every time I talk to a dad who's kind of just going through the repeat mindset, I'm just like, until you invite life in your life, they're not going to learn to invite it in theirs. And your kids will probably turn out fine, but they're not going to ask more from life. They're not going to reach for farther than they have ever thought. They're not going to go past their comfort zone if they didn't see dad do it. If they saw, I don't know where my kids are going to think their dad is a podcaster when they were younger, but when they're older, hopefully it understands that like you can put your voice on the world and you can say things and make an impact and not worry about what other people say. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No, I was going to say, because what you just said, I was thinking, they're going to have this wonderful, huge archive. And then I got to thinking of one of your guests, Ken Wimberly, with his,
with his legacy app. Yeah. That guy was perfectly designed.
Because you're creating a legacy for your children just by having this podcast.
And stories and wisdom. And hopefully this is all still here and it doesn't get deleted somehow. But like everything here is like a chance to know me. And, I think the most powerful question that we can ask or prepare our kids for, whether we're here or whether we're gone, is giving them the tools to ask, what would dad do? And be able to understand, what would dad do? And if they don't know dad, they can't answer that question.
Yeah, it's really true.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. I hate to wrap up this interview. This web interview definitely is one of those that could go on forever because I feel like we both are very passionate about making sure that our legacy is a certain way, understanding that it's on target to where it needs to land, and that we do it on purpose and intentionally. And if you don't make intention behind it, you don't cross those mile markers by accident. They happen because you point your vehicle in those directions and you get there where you need to go. I have one question for you though. Sure. If you have one piece of advice that you want to make sure every dad learns from the hard lessons of your life as a dad, what dad advice do you want to make sure everybody gets out of your experience so far?
Well, what I'll tie this back into personal finance, since that's kind of my thing at the moment. You've heard the phrase, compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe, or something to that effect. Probably heard that before. Well, the reason that's a thing is because you get interest on your interest, and then you get interest on your interest on your interest, right? So it's this thing that mushrooms. I believe that the same thing about stress and happiness. If you've got a lot of stress in your life, it's going to increase and increase and increase. Or if it's happiness, it's going to increase and increase. You're going to get interest on one of them, either the stress or the happiness. So I try to always tell people it's going to build. So let it be the happiness. Find ways to get rid of the stress, whether it's making a financial plan, doing some meditation, maybe both. That's the seed that you want to grow, not the bad stuff.
And I would even tie that to fatherhood, that if you compound the memories you make, those memories compound additional wisdom that over and over time, they'll understand how to lead themselves. And just slowing down and just saying to hell with them. I can't tell you how many times I've sat at this computer and be like, you know what, nothing's going to productive happening in the next hour. And we go for a bike ride. And that bike ride is where I'll have the next idea. And it wasn't at my computer.
Yes,
and
that's absolutely right.
It's that compounding idea of like, go to a place where your energy increases, like the law of attraction. Like when you get your energy and your vibration at a higher level, you start attracting different kind of things. And compound interest is almost just this compounding effect of you are attracting more of whatever you're thinking about, and it's compounding every day. And anybody that's lived paycheck to paycheck, it doesn't feel like it's a flat line. It feels like you're digging a hole and you're getting lower and lower, even though every week it's paycheck to paycheck. It doesn't get any deeper in the negatives on your bank account, but man, does that stress level get more and more and more. Well, Tyson, if people want to find out more about OnTrajectory, where is the best place to dive into what you're up to and to find more about it?
Sure. Just check us out at OnTrajectory.com. If you want to, kick the program around, there's a free 14-day trial, no credit card or anything like that. If you just want to reach out to me, I'm Ty at OnTrajectory.com, and or LinkedIn, Tyson Koska. You can find me as well.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I'll include all of those links down in the show notes for anybody wanting to check them out or send Tyson an email and learn more about how to get your life back on track. And to put a bow on it of design your legacy that's worth remembering. And that doesn't happen by accident. Thank you again for coming on the podcast today, Tyson.
It's been great, Ben. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope that you got everything out of that episode that I did and then some. What is my big takeaway is right when he talked about his military transition and talking about what he took away from it was this ability that he could do anything that he put his mind to. And I loved this little wormhole we went down when we were talking about my inability to kind of think that way and his ability to think that way. What we don't often think of is that's ultimately what the military taught us. It taught us how to live, and it gave us an abundance mindset to really frame exactly what was going on. It was teaching us how wide, how big the world really was. But it also was teaching a little bit of how maybe irrelevant you are, that you are just a number. But in the context of how you can own your life going forward, owning your numbers in the idea of is OnTrajectory, pun intended there, and understanding that you can do anything when you put your mind to it, that kind of personal freedom is accepted into your life when you realize that you don't have to be a number. There are ways to get beyond this. There are ways to live beyond the numbers. There are ways to live other than paycheck to paycheck. So what I want you to really take away from my big takeaway and this interview is really look at what the beginning part of your transition was going in the military and what was your post-transition feeling leaving the military, because you were someone with goals going in, and contrasting that to who you were on the outside when you left, that is so important. There is so much value in gold that you can determine from leaving the military, comparing it where you started. And then also, what do you feel is possible because you joined the military? That is a big question. What do you feel that this makes possible in your life now that you've added this whole new set of things to your life, these experiences, the width, the depth of how you see the world? What becomes possible? Guys, that is all I have for you this week. I'll be back again with you another episode next week. As always, have an amazing week, and I'll talk soon.